Hello and welcome to the Special Response Diver Podcast. I'm Jordan Harvell, your host, and as always, I am so excited that you're here with us for another episode. I just want to remind you, this is all brought to you by Special Response Diving International, where we know the challenges that public safety divers face underwater. That's why we've created training and resources that can help them in any scenario they encounter so that every dive is safe and successful. Well, today I am here again once more with the one and only Michael Gast. How are you, Michael?
I'm doing fine. It's good to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Welcome back. It's been a little bit, but glad to have you back here and on another episode with us. And haven't seen you since we were both in Texas a couple of weeks ago, both teaching advanced recovery specialist to a group up there. How you been?
I'm doing fine. I'm doing just fine since the surgery. I had that back surgery, and I'm able to dive again. But teaching is more dear to me.
So you were, when we were both up there, we were teaching a group for advanced recovery specialists. So focusing on lift bags, doing just kind of more the technicality of getting bigger objects out of the water, not thinking them as immovable objects, but saying, how do we use them to our advantage? They're already trying to get out of the water, all that kind of stuff. But what fascinates me when you see that is people forget that it's still on the bottom. And they want to treat it as if it's like this, I got to be, neutral buoyant and I got to do all that. And that's what we're going to talk about today is the positives of negative buoyancy and why negative buoyancy is not your enemy.
That's correct. And negative buoyancy is a dear cousin to any search and recovery diver because you've got to get into the bottom. You got to be part of the bottom.
Because, stuff goes to the bottom when it goes underwater, right?
That's very, very true. But the problem is two hands touching the bottom is not going to give you that search method that you need to accomplish to find anything.
Yeah, which is where a lot of people spend their time is like, I'm touching the bottom. I can touch it. But why does that not work?
Well, because, again, it's just two hands. When you're down there on the bottom with about 6 or 7 inches of silt, smaller object that fall into the bottom, you've got to get down onto the bottom, let your whole body be the magnet. Your elbows, your arms, your wrists, your knees, your fins. I can't tell you the number of guns that I found over the years in my career that I found because my hands missed it, but in passing by it, my knee bumped it or my fin bumped something hard. And all right, let's find out what that is.
I remember the first course that when I was doing special response diver, we were training off of a dock, and I remember you had said, you got to make sure your whole body's under there, your whole body's touching everything. You're like kind of spread out, and I was like, I'm going to catch everything else. And sure enough, that pass I did, I was doing an arc search. There was a knife we were looking for, and it was just for training, but I felt it. Somebody's dive knife, boom, right there, right on my knee, and I missed it with my hands, and sure enough, it works. Just like you said it did.
Yeah, when
Amazing.
you get into neutral buoyancy, which is trained everywhere for divers and everything, it's more of an environmental impact circumstance. Don't damage the reef. Don't do this. But it's like when you're doing search and recovery, you have to get down there. You got to be negative. You got to be part of the bottom. You got to feel the bottom with your whole body.
And people are so scared. I don't know why. I see it with training. People just, for some reason, there's some psychological or whatever. They just don't want to touch the bottom for the icky factor. But then you get people who are like, yeah, no, I'm on the bottom. We will watch them and physically see them off the bottom, and they believe they are on the bottom.
It's a psychological thing. Yes, it is.
And so the kind of the test for us is just to look and say, all right, how much mud is caked into your mask, into everything else? Because that's really what it has to be. That's the only way you're going to know somebody was really doing the job. And that's the test for all of you listening. If you look out and you're like, oh, that person was diving. Oh, that person was really diving through the mud and everything. I'm going to have to send you a picture after this. I did a recovery a couple weeks ago of a Porsche 911. A guy had just driven off of a seawall. And it was here in Miami. It's the bay. It's pretty clear. But the mud that had just built up was not just mud. It was like all decomposition, leaves and branches and all this stuff over the years. But that car was so stuck down in the mud. I'm trying to reach down to the axle. I pulled so much gunk out of my ear. I'm going to show you this picture in just a minute.
That happens.
It was a lot. Anyway, sometimes you're diving in mud under the water.
If you're wearing a wetsuit and you don't have mud up the wrist of your wetsuit, you haven't been searching the bottom.
Exactly. So, what are some of the challenges that you've seen over the years when you're teaching dive teams? Just overcoming that whole mystery of stuff, and is it on the bottom? Is it not? The whole midwater mystery and
Lost in midwater.
Oh my
Dun
gosh.
dun dun. That's an excuse that has been accepted and used, throughout the world when divers can't find a body or something. It's like, well, where was the drowning person sank? He's on the bottom. He's going to stay on the bottom until he starts coming up. Then he's going to come to the surface unless he's attached to something. But trapped in midwater has become the ploy that, well, we were probably just under him. He was trapped, 3 or 4 feet above the surface. That's impossible. Scientifically, physics just doesn't work that way. If he started floating off the bottom, he's going to continue floating until he gets to the surface, because the expansion of the gases and everything in the body makes the body lighter the more it goes up. An inch up, 2 inches up, a foot up, 2 feet up, it's going to continue to the surface.
And the reason it comes back down is because either parts of the body open up completely with the expansion of gases, and then the gases escape and it goes back down, becomes negatively buoyant again.
Becomes negative again, and it's going to go all the way to the bottom.
Or when they off gas and it doesn't move, it's because there's the suction of mud or whatever, which I remember you telling me that's the reason they shot cannons over water back in the day. The Huckleberry Finn.
That's right. Somebody was lost in a lake or something. They'd actually get a boat with a small 5-pound cannon, and they'd shoot 3 or 4 shots. And it's the vibration that would shake the bottom. And if a hand were in the bottom, and all it takes, a hand being under the mud is enough to require 10 or 15 pounds of lift, more than the body's able to give. And a hand, an arm, a knee, a foot, part of the body, it's sitting in the mud down there. And the suction is horrendous.
What's the wildest story that you've heard on midwater, and like people just looking in the wrong place because of midwater?
Well, it's a story where the excuse is there. Well, this guy drowned last night, and we searched and we didn't find anything. So he's obviously trapped in midwater.
Dun dun dun.
That's, by the way, with all the teaching I do, that's what all the
That's why I'm saying it, because you're you cannot say midwater and not be followed by dun dun dun.
That's right. That's that mysterious thing, but that is right next to
midwater. Is always associated too with currents, because they'll say, "Oh, it was those underwater currents in a lake."
That's true.
That has
and
no
a current
inflow or
might
outflow.
move something. Current might move something if it were a river or stream or the opening mouth of a lake. But when you get out into the lake, there's no current. I can remember a time when the fire rescue responded, and they were searching for a drowned kid, 13-year-old kid. And they searched this lake, but they moved all of their starting points from where the witness said this is where the kid went underwater, about 50, 60 yards, what they called downstream, because they were seeing the water moving, and they were saying, well, that you could see the current, so by the time he got to the bottom, he was probably 50, 60 yards, because it was a 40-foot lake.
Yeah.
And they searched for hours, and we responded to the scene, and afterwards, the scene transitioned to a recovery rather than a rescue. And we got the same information. We went to the same spot, and we found the victim 4 feet away from the downline.
Wow.
It's just listen to your witnesses and start somewhere.
That was the original downline.
That's correct.
And they searched around that downline.
They say they did, but
So
they transitioned.
Why didn't they find it the first time?
Because they weren't doing proper searches. A lot of training goes on, and that training is usually in a nice clear lake with a nice grassy bottom or a hard bottom.
Or pools, swimming
Or
pools.
swimming pools, that's right. You've got to get into the environment where you're going to be working. You've got to become negatively buoyant where you're going to be. Even for a body, you got to be down there. Something I've said for years is you never find a body when you're searching for it. It will find you.
Every time.
Every single time. It's going to be a hand in your mask or a face in your mask, and it's a shock.
Yeah.
But it's like, okay, got the body. But then you don't go to the surface and say, I found the body, it's right down here, because you're moving in the water.
Right.
You attach a line to the body.
Don't lose the body.
And come to the surface.
And that's true for anything. If you find anything underwater, tie a line to it.
That's correct.
Because there's nothing worse than finding something and coming up and like, where was it? Oh, it's right here. And you can't find it for another 2 hours.
Yeah, I've had divers literally search for something they found. 2 hours later, they can't find the thing. And it's like, it moved. Well, that's again in the mindset of people that go underneath the water. Things that go to the bottom are gone forever. Well, why are they gone forever? I mean, if I drop a gun in the water at such a location, it's going to be there 10 years later. It's going to be there 20 years later. It's going to be there 100 years later. Okay, it doesn't move, but for some reason we get this idea that something came and moved it, or the bottom shifted. Or
those fish, they like to pick those guns up.
Big fish.
Yeah.
Yeah, those bottom. And an alligator may have bit the thing and swallowed it. Hello?
Yeah, and why aren't they eating all the other metal down there?
That's correct.
So there's a. I remember when we were teaching a course here in Miami. We were teaching some police officers, and we were in a canal. Okay, it's pretty much zero visibility because they had been dredging the canal, in a little bit of a current, and one of the guys loses his fin. And I just remember you saying, he's like, and this guy's a veteran for 20 years. And he's like, I've lost the fin. And I may have told this story or mentioned this story on this podcast before, but I think it's worth repeating because we're only 12 feet deep.
Right.
And he loses the fin and he's just like, I'm going to get another pair because that one's gone. We are in an underwater search and recovery special response diver course. And this guy is already writing off this fin as lost and gone forever.
A veteran of diving too.
20 years. And we are in a 50 to 60 foot wide canal, 12 feet deep. And he's like, it's gone. And so I remember you just said, hey, Jordan, would you go to my truck and grab a Coke bottle? And I grabbed a Coke bottle. I brought it back. You tied some string to it and a rock. And you're like, hey, no, it was another fin. You said, give me your other fin. And you grabbed his other fin and you tied it to the string and you measured out 15 feet or whatever. And you said, where were you when you dropped it? He's like, I think I was right here. You said, okay, line up. Okay, drop it. And you just drop the fin. And then the Coke bottle moves down the canal. And then all of a sudden it stops and it gets pulled by the current, so it's pulling against the current. You said, follow that line down. It's within 5 feet. Man, you would have thought that you had brought that guy's best friend back from the dead. Like he just didn't think it was possible. And sure enough, he goes down. He's like, it was right on top of the other one. And he comes out of the water just holding both of them. And you smiled and moved on like it was no big deal. I thought, I was like, that's the coolest trick I've ever seen in my life. But it's still amazing how people will know, even in class. You're literally here to learn how to find things underwater. And you think it goes away forever. And there's so much in people's minds over the years, all across the country with dive teams. They're like, nope, it's in the water. It's gone. What do you think you're doing here? And those are the teams I think you can pinpoint and say, you know what? You've never really searched properly.
That's correct. That's correct.
You've never really done it the right way.
It's poor training. It's poor training. For example, if you're a military diver and you've retired and you dove all these years as a military diver, you never did search and recovery diving. You're excellent in the water from getting from point A to point B stealthily and retreating from point B back to point A stealthily. That's your whole purpose for being a military diver. For being a diver that wants to plant a bomb or de-emphasize on a mine or something. Those are the things you do, but because of your water knowledge and skills and capabilities, you're great in the water. But you've never learned how to do a proper search and recovery.
Right.
I've had Navy SEALs, I've had Air Force parajumpers, I've had Army divers, I've had Marine Corps recon, I've had divers of all the sort in the 30 years I've been training these people. And I've never met one that didn't finish the class and say, man, I learned more stuff in this class than I learned in my whole career.
Yeah.
That it never even entered my mind that you got to do things this way.
Right.
And it's like, yeah, they don't teach search and recovery. They teach you to do what you need to do.
You're doing a mission specific, yeah.
All we do is push them over that bridge and say, here's how you accomplish a successful mission.
That was only one time we pushed people over the bridge, okay? And that was on purpose. We were teaching them how to jump off the bridge, okay, just for clarity there.
That's correct. I remember I was training these 4 divers from the Albany, New York Police Department. Years of experience, years and years of diving, and when they learned this new search method, they were astounded. They even had me, during the break, go out into the parking lot at night and have them literally do it in the parking lot on foot, walking, but getting the method down.
Yeah.
And they were like, we have never, ever seen this method before. And they're talking to one another, and they're like, man, we could go back and find a lot of old cases that we couldn't accomplish because the arc search, the circle search, neither of those searches were able to be effective. And they were just so shocked. And they literally went back to New York, and I remember getting a phone call one day from their sergeant. He says, we were able to close 6 old cases from years because we found the murder weapon. But we
because
could
they
not
could actually
find
get
them.
on the bottom.
We could actually get on the bottom the way you taught us to become negative and do the search, and we accomplished 6. I think it was 6.
Wow.
Old cases where they were murder weapons, and they recovered the weapon.
Man, I can't even imagine like what's going through their mind when they're doing that. They're going back and they're probably like, "Oh, I was not on the bottom this this time or that time."
True.
Yeah.
But again, because of the neutral buoyancy,
Yeah.
that is so enforced in diving, it's so ingrained in them, they get to where they're a foot off the bottom with their hands on the bottom.
Yeah.
They're literally tapping the bottom.
Right.
They're not really searching the bottom.
And a lot of people still use. I mean, even though I'm doing an arc search, I'm using my eyes to search.
That's true.
And that also happens a lot of times where because our water's pretty clear and stuff, maybe, but at the same time, if you're doing a search properly, it should be zero visibility. Unless you're on a sandy bottom, if you are doing your search properly, it should become a zero visibility dive.
Well,
because you're stirring it up.
It will become.
Right.
Zero visibility
I'm saying
is
when
the
it
turbidity.
it doesn't become a zero visibility, that's when you need to question, am I actually doing a proper search?
That's true. You should be kicking up that bottom. Oh, I don't want to kick up the bottom because I can't see anymore. Well, you shouldn't be seeing anyways. You get down there, you get your search method, and you do the search. The other thing is each individual is the weak link of a search pattern. Because remember, you're moving, even if you're sweeping your hands, you got one hand on your line and you're sweeping going forward, the speed with which you're moving forward depends on how well you're covering the bottom.
Right.
And if you've only got the palm of your hand on the bottom, you're leaving a 2 to 3 foot space between the sweeps of the palms.
Right.
Depending where if your elbow was also on the bottom, your body was also on the bottom, you bump into something hard, it's probably what you're searching for. And if it's not, you just keep going.
Right. And some of the pushback I've heard from people over the years is they'll say, well, we don't get all the way on the bottom like that because of the environment. We could be, getting cut, or we could get stabbed with even just other stuff, not even looking for a knife or a gun or anything. Just like something could happen to the diver. Well, that's part of the exposure suit. I mean, your wetsuit does need to be like, don't be wearing a 1 mil wetsuit if you're on a bottom that could have glass and cans. If you're going to wear gloves, I know you don't ever wear gloves when you're searching, and I will only if it's like a really rough bottom, and I'm still using really thin gloves, so I have abrasion protection, but I'm still able to feel everything. And so you have to just take into account, be like, let's think practically. And if you're moving slow enough, you shouldn't be hitting anything to like slice your hand open. Okay, in all the years you've been doing this, and all the years I've been doing this, I've never had a real cut on my hand from like I've cut my hand on coral or some other kind of organism underwater, but it's never been like a dangerous thing. And so I think that also deters people. It's like, well, we're going to be down there, we're going to get over rocks and glass, and there's beer bottles down here, and aluminum cans that are cut open. Yeah, but that's why you wear an exposure suit. That's why you're wearing. Some people are already wearing dry suits. It shouldn't be that big of a deal. And if your equipment can't handle that, reevaluate your equipment.
That's true. Like you said, I have never wore gloves. And everybody is, oh, hey, you don't wear gloves. You're going to these canals and everything. Well, if you're not forcefully bulling through the bottom and everything, you're not going to hit something hard enough to really cut. You move your hand across there and you're feeling, and your fingers are moving, and you're feeling for what you're feeling for, you'll find something sharp. I've found needles on the bottom. I've found sharp knives on the bottom. I've broken glass, broken bottles. I've never been cut by them. The only time I've ever been cut by anything from underwater is getting in and out of the water, going up the side of the canal,
Sharp
because
canal
you got
banks.
more weight
Yeah.
on those things. And again, those can be, remedied by being more careful and looking before you leap.
But that is the difference between people who actually get in and get the work done. They're not afraid to get in and get the work done. And you got people who are terrified of just, I don't want to be on the bottom, or I'm neutrally buoyant, or I'm negatively buoyant because I'm touching the bottom. Well, those are the people that are going to have mild success because you're looking for something with your eyes. You're looking for something, I'm probably looking for a car, a safe, a cash register, or some other kind of evidence that should be big enough for me to run into. But what happens when you're not? And if those that are out there have done investigations and those that are actively have cases that can't be closed because they can't find the knife or the gun that was used in a homicide, they can't find the barrel of the gun, because sometimes that's what criminals do. They take a gun apart and they throw it in the water.
And they never tell you about it.
Yeah, exactly, because criminals are so truthful.
That's true.
But that those are the different, I think, mentalities that come into it. But the question that has to be asked from dive teams is what actually works? What actually produces verifiable results and success? And being negative on the bottom is just so far beyond what these other techniques that are being taught, which is just to be on the bottom, touching. And so that's kind of our big stance is, hey, make sure you're actually negatively buoyant. You are a bulldozer in the water. If you are not carving a trail through that sediment as you go through. Now, I get it. Let's say you're on a reef because you have a fatality off of a dive boat. Guess what? You're on a reef. You shouldn't be doing that kind of search anyway. You have probably 20 plus foot visibility. You have, there's different scenarios. You have to use sound judgment. But when you're getting in the majority of America, in the majority of the world, where you have these canals and lakes and ponds and retention ponds and waterways, that's where stuff gets dumped and thrown out. You've got to be able to be on the bottom.
And your method of search has to be distanced-wise according to the object of the search, not the clarity of the water.
Right.
Because so many people will start a search and they're searching. And once they make that first pass in the search, they've already stirred up the bottom to the second pass.
Right.
So now they've got to go back and say, well, okay, we got to go back to whatever the size of the object was.
Yeah, well, how much line you let out, what kind of search pattern you're using, who's doing the search, all those things need to be factored into when you're, are we looking for a gun or are we looking for a car?
That's correct.
A box truck, a U-Haul truck is much easier to find. Well, for some people, we've heard stories about those getting missed in canals too, but we're not going to talk about that. But there's so much that can be just thought through, and that just takes a few minutes to think through that instead of just, this is what we've always done. Well, question what's always been done. See what actually works.
Well, the simplest search method, and we did this with the class we just had out in Texas, all the divers were just amazed. And that is, where did what you are looking for, where did the witness say it was?
Right.
Put a drop line down there. Now, we call that the last seen point.
Yep.
And the drop line will drop, and if it's a good reference, you're going to be within a 6-foot distance
right.
of what it is you're searching for. And where people make the mistake is they will go down and search and move off the drop line and continue their search. Now they have no reference, because remember, searching is reference and control.
Right.
You've got to maintain that. And next thing you see, they're 20 feet off from where they're supposed to be working. They don't even know what direction they're going in. Then they'll come up.
And a lot of times they get off of that because even one of the references, they're not on the bottom.
That's correct.
They're not keeping contact, and they get, I thought I was next to. If you were negative on the bottom, you never get lost.
That's for sure.
You were on the bottom.
If you're negative
it sounds
on the
elementary,
bottom,
but you have way more control over where your search is going and where you are.
Yeah. Attaching to a car, hooking up to a car, putting a chain on the car. All that work requires you to be negative, not where you're positive,
right? And
you're trying to reach and do it. You don't have the control you have.
Exactly.
That's where you're going to end up getting hurt. You're going to scrape something, cut something, because you're trying to reach down bodies. You find a body underwater, and you want to be able to tie a line to the body. If you're neutrally buoyant on the bottom, you're fighting your neutral buoyancy to make your tie. Get down on the bottom, tie, then go back up.
There's so much comfort too in just knowing that you're not fighting something else. And a lot of stress gets kicked into divers because they're I don't understand what's happening and why I'm like, I felt stressed. Were you on the bottom? No. Go back down and do it. but be on the bottom. Put your knees on the bottom and then work on the car. Put your knees on the bottom, then address whatever you're dealing with. Those kinds of things just add so much comfort to a diver as well.
That just adds so much. That's the simplicity.
Yeah.
At its very degree. And most people, if they were like given that information, it was about like, wow, they become a flathead real quick. Flathead is one that, I should have thought of that myself.
And that's part of the transition that I think some dive teams have difficulty with. It's like, well, we learned with a public safety company, or we learned with a sport diving company who teaches public safety diving. You know, they're not always going to transfer. They're divers, so let's just transfer this and just add a little bit more knowledge. Yeah, but you actually have to forget some of the knowledge you had. You need to do away with some of the knowledge you had in sport diving. This is a different animal. And so that's our encouragement today. If you've got a team that you've been thinking through and saying, hey, we've done some surges, we don't feel like we have high probability of success when we go out, try this. Be on the bottom. Just be negatively buoyant. You don't need to be overweighted, but be weighted enough that you can stay on the bottom with all the air out of your BC. You've got to be able to get down to where the stuff is. And so that's our challenge today. And Michael, I want to say thank you again for coming out and being on the podcast once again, sharing your wisdom and experience.
Well, just remember, there's always the positives of negative buoyancy.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, and until next time.